This video is going to cover the topic of multiplying integers using the number line model. Be sure the date and topic are at the top of your page. The essential question for the video is how can we use the number line model to multiply integers? In some ways, the number line model for multiplication is similar to that of subtraction. In both cases, we kind of need to visualize walking along the number line, which means we need to think about a couple things. We need to think about which direction we're facing, either positive side, right, facing all the positives to the right, or negatives. And we have to think about whether we are walking or jumping or moving forwards or backwards on our number line. And for this video, I'll try my best to use maybe a little stick figure to demo what we have done with the number line before in class. So I'll draw a little stick figure, and that person will either be facing to the right or maybe facing to the left. And that might help us imagine ourselves on the number line. So we'll start with the basics, a positive times a positive. We have the number sentence 3 times 2, right? And of course that means that we want 3 groups of 2. And our first integer is positive, so I'm just going to make sure I know which way is which, of course. The first integer is positive, which means our little person, or if we were on the number line, we would be facing the positive direction. And because it's 3, we're going to be making 3 jumps. The second integer is also positive, which means we're going to be moving forward. So this is the direction we're facing, and we're moving forward in that direction. And we're going to be moving 2 units at a time. So facing the right, I go once, 2 units, another twice, 2 units, and 3 times 2 units. And of course I end up on 6 because 3 times 2 is 6. For our second example, let's look at a positive times a negative. So let's do 3 times a negative 2. And that should be a multiplication symbol there, sorry. So we have 3 times a negative 2, a related but different question. And in this case, the first integer is positive. So once again, we would be facing our positive numbers. And our second integer is negative. So that means we, or this little critter here, would be walking backwards, right? So we'd be going behind us. And we're going to be walking backwards 2 spaces at a time, right? Because we're doing a negative 2. And we would need to do that 3 times. So we would do it 2 spaces, 2 spaces, and 2 spaces. So 3 times negative 2 is a negative 6. And what about a negative times a positive? So again, I'll use a related problem here. Let's do a negative 3 times a positive 2, right? So this time, it's a little different. Our first integer is negative. So that means if we were looking on our number line, we would be facing the negative direction, right? But we're multiplying it by a positive, which means we're going to be moving forward. So this little person would be moving forward. And we're moving forward 2 spaces at a time. And we're going to do that 3 times. So negative 3 times 2, we would move 2 spaces forward once, 2 spaces forward twice, 2 spaces forward 3 times. We would end up at negative 6. Our answer, once again, would be negative 6. And you might be noticing that there's a little bit of a pattern developing here. And if you see that and you want to share that tomorrow, feel free to bring that with you to class. Lastly, we need to talk about a negative times a negative. And this one's kind of the hardest one to conceptualize. But let's do the same related problem. Negative 3 times negative 2. So that's what we're going to work with here. So in this case, the first integer is negative. So if I'm looking at the number line, I would need to look in the negative direction. So here's my little person facing the negative direction. And then the second integer is also negative. So that means that we need to walk backwards. Right, so we'd walk behind us, and we're going to be walking backwards 2 spaces at a time, right? That's what this tells us, and we're going to do it 3 times. So this person would walk backwards 2 spaces once, 2 spaces twice, 2 spaces 3 times, and we end up at 6, but it's a positive 6. So a negative 3 times a negative 2 ended up being a positive 6. So let's think about what we need to have as our kind of steps that we need to remember. The first is that the first integer tells us which way we are facing. It also tells us how many times we move down the number line, how many jumps we make or how many hops we make up or down the number line. The sign of the second integer tells us if we are moving, kind of if we were walking the number line, if we were moving forwards or if we were walking backwards. And it also lets us know how many units or how many steps to take within each jump or each group that we are moving. Right? So those are kind of the tips that we want to remember. Let's apply them on a couple more questions. So set up a number line and let's try -4 times 3. Take a moment to fill in the number line the way you think you would, right? Start with a little person at 0 and decide which way you're going to face, which way you're going to move, and where you would end up. Pause the video, give it a try, and then we'll see how you did. How'd you do? Did you notice that you should have been facing the negative direction and that you should have been moving 4 times and each time 3 units moving forward, which would land you at -12. So -4 times 3 is -12. Let's do one more. So let's try this negative times a negative, right? We have -5 times -2. So take a moment to decide what this would look like on the number line, where you would be going, which way you would be facing, and come up with a product, come up with the answer to this multiplication question. Pause the video and then we'll check in and see how you did. Hopefully here you realize that we are facing negative, right? It starts with a -5, so our integer is negative to start with. We're facing negative. And then we need to move backwards because we are multiplying by a -2. And so we're going to move backwards 2 times each, and we're going to do that 5 times total, which means we land at a +10. So -5 times a -2 is a +10. So the number line is just one way to think about multiplying integers. We can also use the chip model and eventually the algorithm. Maybe you are already thinking about an algorithm that you can use based on the examples we've seen, so feel free to write it down and share it in class. And remember that the essential question of the video was how to use the number line model to multiply integers, and it can be a little bit tricky, but like the subtraction model, it can be quite useful to visualize what is happening. So make sure you have your notes and any questions with you in class.